able to sit on the mountain where Jesus was preaching. And you see, it starts in Matthew chapter 5, and been someone there in that audience because Jesus had a way of reading people's hearts, knew it was in their minds. And then as you read through this Sermon on the Mount, you see that Jesus covers several different topics. And it's one of the few times in Scripture where you see Jesus show some of his sense of humor, some of his, I think, the funnier sides that Jesus had by using these very vivid and visual illustrations to help get his message across. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up to Matthew chapter 7. We're not going to go through the whole Sermon on the Mount, but we're going to start in Matthew chapter 7. I've always had a weird thing with eyeballs, with eyes. I'm very sensitive there, don't like to touch them. I remember even when I was a little kid, I'd watch my dad put his contacts in, and he would open his eye and look into the mirror, and then he would hold his finger up, and he would actually touch his eyeball with the contact, and it always weirded me out and made me just kind of like shiver. And my wife puts in eye drops sometimes, and the way she can keep her eye open while the eye drop goes in, I've tried to put in eye drops before, and I blink every time, and I end up wasting, half the bottle of eye drops before one single drop gets into my eye. Well, Jesus opens up with this very visual illustration in Matthew chapter 7 when he's talking about judging. And I think this is a section that many of us are familiar with. I know that there are several in the world that are familiar with this because they'll be quick to point out, judge not that you be not judged. Basically, don't judge me, leave me alone. Well, Jesus is talking about judgment here in Matthew chapter 7, and he uses that illustration where he says, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And then starting in verse 3 of chapter 7, it says, why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye when there is a log in your own eye? Now, this is a very comical illustration that Jesus uses and it's meant to be that way. It's meant to make the message stick, and it's to help them to remember, and it's supposed to be so outlandish and obnoxious that people go, that is just ridiculous. And there's a point behind that. Well, you imagine a person with a giant board sticking out of their eye. You can't even get close to a person when you have that board sticking out there to even see the speck. There was this guy, this teenager, when I was growing up in Virginia, and we were outside playing in the yard, and we were playing football, and he was basically trying to show me how big he was and how small I was, that when I ran towards him, he would hold his hand out, and his hand would be on my forehead, and there was no way that I could even swing or get close to him because, I was slightly shorter than I am now. But Jesus is showing how you can't get close to someone to see that they have a speck in their eye if you have this giant board sticking out of your own. But I want us to notice a few things about this section here. When you hear people say, judge not that you be not judged, or basically what they're trying to say is, don't criticize me because we all have sin, because there are all things that we struggle with, which is true. But I want us to notice here that Jesus is not saying not to judge someone. In fact, later in this same chapter, he talks about how we will know people by their fruit, starting in verse 15, where he says, beware the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. So Jesus already points out within this same section that there are times when we will have to judge people. We'll have to judge them by their fruits. We're not trying to criticize someone or just tear someone down for no reason, but Jesus is saying there are times when you will have to judge people. But what he's saying is that realize that we do have our own sin problems and that there are things that we may have to take care of on our own before we are able to help somebody else out. But I want you to also see the language that Jesus uses at the end of this section here. We'll just start in verse 4. He says, or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when there is the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. You see, what Jesus is not saying, judge not that you be not judged, and don't even consider someone else. Don't even try and help them because you are a sinner. You have problems in your own life. What Jesus is saying, you can help your brother much better once you take the log out of your eye. You can see that speck way better once you get that log out of your own eye. But Jesus is talking about righteous judgment and judging each other out of love. Why would you judge someone, or one of these false prophets that Jesus uses as another example who comes in, why would you judge that person? Why would you look at that person? And it's for the betterment of the entire body, of the entire family. Why would you want to help someone with a speck in their eye? Well, hopefully it's for the betterment of that person. You might think, well, it's just a speck. You know, we all have problems, so why bother with the speck? Have you ever had a grain of sand or anything like that in your eye before? It might be just a speck, but there are some of those pieces of sand or dirt or whatever can bring a grown man to his knees. I've had it in my eye before, an eyelash. I mean, they're attached to your eye, but if you get that in your eye, it's like you stick your head underneath a faucet and you're like desperately trying to get it out because your eye becomes agitated and it's horrible. Jesus is talking about we need to help each other. We also need to be mindful of our own lives as well. But I want you to notice as Jesus goes down through this sermon here, he keeps throwing out these illustrations that I find very masterful that Jesus uses. He says, do not give dogs what is holy, and don't throw your pearls before the pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. Don't give to dogs what is holy. You know, I love dogs. I'm pretty sure everyone here is aware of that. Our house is kind of overrun with dogs, so when my brother comes over, it's even more overrun with dogs. It's like a pack. But it says, don't give the dogs what is holy. The dogs back then weren't really like the dogs today. They weren't these cute little poodles or terriers or German shepherds. They were these terrifying, ravenous dogs that had a lot of diseases. Remember when Lazarus was sick and he's laying next to the rich man's gate, there are dogs that are licking his wounds. They're gross. They lived on the street. They were very nasty. They were very fierce. They were very mean. But he's saying, don't give to dogs what is holy. He's talking about the gospel here. It seems like a lot of Jesus' messages when he's preaching, he kind of covers them up in these illustrations. He'll use parables or he'll use illustrations like this to get us to think. I mean, don't you even begin to think when you read through Matthew chapter 7 and you read about a log sticking out of someone's eye, trying to get a speck out of someone else's eye, or about not giving to dogs what is holy? Does it not make you think? Because that's what Jesus is trying to do. Think about it. Well, what's up with the dogs? What's holy? What is Jesus talking about here? Well, Jesus is talking about the gospel. There are some people who are going to reject the gospel in this world. And he goes on to say, don't throw your pearls before the pigs. Another graphic illustration. Don't throw something precious before someone or something that is so filthy and unworthy of that. Don't throw your pearls before the pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and then turn around to attack you. There are those who are not going to accept the gospel. And in fact, there are some that will take the opportunity to ridicule you based on the fact that you just brought up the gospel. And I don't know how many of you have ever been through something like that. You've tried to teach the gospel to someone, you've tried to bring it up to someone before, and then have it completely flipped around on you, and they're now trying to attack you or to make fun of you, or they're not going to listen, or they become angry. It's not a very comfortable place to be. But Jesus basically says, move on. Be careful who you spend so much time with, because there are some people who are not interested in the gospel. Now, I know that is something that we don't talk too much about in the church, because we say, well, everyone deserves to hear the gospel. That's true. Everyone deserves to be taught the gospel if there's the opportunity. That's true. But there are also people who will not listen, and your time will be better spent elsewhere. You know, that's also a good reminder for us as we read through the scriptures and as we are trying to become transformed this year. That's the whole theme. That's the vision that we have. We want to be transformed. We want to be someone else. When we're reading through in our own personal Bible reading, when we're praying, are we being transformed, or is this basically pearls before the pigs to us? But then I want you to notice this next section here, and I think that it's placed in this spot for a reason. In verse 7, he says, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened to you, for everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks that will be opened. A hopeful verse for those. Remember, he's just talking about the gospel here, but for those that are spreading the gospel, for those that are going out and looking for someone to teach the gospel to, this is a very hopeful verse, because Jesus is telling us that there are those who are looking for the gospel. There are those whose hearts are soft and willing to hear about it, and they are praying about it, and they're looking for someone like you to bring them the gospel, to teach them the gospel. It's very easy to get into this mindset and think, well, nobody today wants to know about the gospel. No one today is interested in hearing what the Bible has to say. I mean, if you just look at their lives or look at the world around us, everything is it's chaos. And people are so mean, and people just have their own beliefs, and we're not going to convince them no matter how hard we try. But Jesus is reminding us that there are people who are looking for people like you and me to take the gospel to. They're knocking on the door. If they open it, or we have to be the ones that are willing to teach them. But verse 9, he goes into another illustration again. He says, or which one of you, if his sons asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, then how much will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask of him? You know, it's been said before, and I believe it's true, that those who have had a bad relationship with their father growing up will have a harder time having a good relationship with God because they will see God as more of the father figure in their life. And if that's a good thing, then it might be a little bit easier for them to find an attachment to God as their father. But if they had a bad relationship with their father, it might be a little bit more difficult for them to develop this relationship with God. I've seen that a few times in my personal life, but I do believe that is true. But Jesus is talking about his own Father. And if you look at it from that perspective, as Jesus being the Son of God, and he's talking about his own Father, and he says, your Father who is in heaven give you good things to those who ask him. Talks about the giving nature of God and how God will give you what you need and what to take care of you because you are a child of God. But if you notice that he starts throwing out all of these illustrations for a point, and I want us to see right here afterwards as he goes into the golden rule starting in verse 12. He says, so whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law of the prophets. Now, I believe it was John actually went over this in his Devo on Wednesday. I don't believe it's out of Matthew chapter 7, though. But it's the golden rule. Now, whatever you would want someone to do to you, or whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. Now, that's another quotable part. Matthew chapter 7 has a couple different quotable sections here. Judge not that you be not judged. And then this section here. It's very simple to memorize and to understand. And even a little child can understand this. If you don't want to be punched in the face, don't punch someone else in the face. I mean, it's very logical as you think about it. But then, in the very next verse in 13, it says, enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide, and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. Everything that he's been talking about up to this point is leading to, I believe, this section right here when Jesus begins to talk about the end of times. And he moves into more of these serious matters, talking about these false prophets that will come in dressed like sheep, but they're actually wolves. But Jesus is pointing all of this to this point right here. Eternity is coming. Which gate are you walking through? Eternity is coming. Which group are you walking with? And when he talks about not judging others in the first part of it, it's important to get that speck out of someone else's eye because we're all walking together somewhere. We're all heading towards a gate. That speck in your eye could keep you from that narrow gate. Of course, that log in your eye can keep you from that narrow gate. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If you fall away, if you stray away off that path, or if you are not a Christian, what would you want someone to do for you? As a Christian, as a child of God, what would you want someone to do? If someone passed you in Walmart and you weren't a Christian, if someone passed you in Walmart and they knew the truth and they had the gospel and they just walked right on past you, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Be aware of what you have. Don't cast your pearls before the pigs, but before someone who is actually asking and knocking and looking. We're all going towards one of two gates, a wide one or a skinny one. And he goes down to talk about the false prophets and the teachings and those that can pull you off of that path. We're a family. We're a family that is going somewhere, and it's my prayer every day that this is the family that's going for that narrow gate, not the wide one. If you have a speck in your eye or a log in your eye this morning, then we can take care of that. If there's something that we can pray for you about, maybe you haven't put on Christ in baptism, then we can help you head for that right gate, for the gate that's smaller than the big one, where that is where the world is going. There are so many in this world that are basically like, not to be mean or degrading, but they are like the pigs. They don't care about the gospel. They don't care about the message of Jesus. But you're here for a reason this morning. That's because you do care. If there is something that we can help you with, or something we can help you start that walk with Jesus, then why not come forward right now as together we stand and as we sing.